There have been people recently that have been saying that Zachariah Sitchin's work is not entirely correct. That a lot of it is true, but some of the gaps were, words were put in because we didn't really know what it meant, what it represented. Is there a kind of a different picture that is now emerging about the Anunnaki that maybe hasn't been taught in pop culture and ancient alien theory for some time?
Actually, no. A lot of Zachariah Sitchin's work has actually been venerated because a lot of people have now gone and independently, including myself, researched these tablets. And anybody can read the tablets because UCLA has a CDLI online cuneiform library. You can go there and take a stone off the virtual shelf and drop it into a translator and read the stones yourself. You don't even need anybody else. And what I found, and many others have found, is that his story was pretty close to being on. Now, everybody has their own perspective as to what you fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
But the underlying story is the same with everybody. Beings came here from another planet or maybe another star system. They began to strip mine this planet for resources as well as Mars.
Yeah.
At some point, they engaged in genetic modification of an existing hominid on this planet. They didn't create human beings from scratch. They genetically modified the beings that were on our cousins before we became Homo sapiens, whatever we were. They genetically modified, probably making us a lot more dumbed down because that's where you get the junk DNA.
Oh, interesting.
We've been disconnected. Our brains were bigger. Our cousins' brains were much bigger than our brains right now, which means they were probably much smarter. The pineal glands were probably bigger as well.
So the story of us being a primitive human and then genetically altered to be a half god Anunnaki, half primitive, may not be correct, and we may have been actually more sentient and more conscious, and then it actually went the other way around.
Absolutely. I truly believe that we were much smarter, much more intelligent, and much more advanced. Not technologically advanced, more spiritually advanced, more in tune with the planet, the Earth, the frequency, the Schumann resonance of the Earth. Our billions of magnetite crystals on our brains were probably being used. We were able to probably navigate the planet, communicate silently and everything else. May have even had other gifts, but I think that was all disconnected when they turned us into slaves and put a gene in, which has been scientifically discovered now, a gene put into us for worship, as well as chromosome number 2 being taken out and fused together, and 2 telomere caps being put on each end to shorten our lifespans.
This story shows up in antiquity in many different cultures.
Yeah.
At one time, I used to feel that there were independent stories that maybe the same thing, that as above, so below, the reflection of the stars and the precession of the equinox manifesting in the physical in the world, right? What do you feel? Do you feel that there was one original story and everything was taken from it? Or do you think that this genetic manipulation with different races has happened many times over the eons?
I think that we are in a situation where the Anunnaki arrived here, or these Atlantean culture arrived here at the time that we fell. I believe that our former human cousins were here and had risen and fallen 4 times, just like the Mayans said, to high levels of civilization on our own. And I believe that the Anunnaki arrived on this planet at a time where we had already fallen again in terms of technology, for whatever reason, whether it was war, whether it was a geological disaster.
Perfect infiltration.
Right. They arrived at a perfect time in our history, and they were able to masquerade as gods and utilize that against us.
And what is the timeline we're looking at?
450,000 years ago, they arrived here. They then mined this planet and worked and lived on this planet along with us and along with other humanoids that were already here, including the Ubaid culture, which was more reptilian. They found those statuettes already in Iraq. And then around 200,000 years into it is when they began infighting, and some of the working class Aiji Anunnaki began to want to have a coup against the rulers. And that's when the decision was made to genetically modify an existing hominid. They could have gone with AI technology, kind of alludes to that type of wording, but they knew that that could be dangerous for them as competitors because they had a few of them already working in the medical labs, but I feel that they thought that maybe AI, as we now are finding out, could be extremely dangerous if you turn Skynet on. At some point, they could realize that human beings are not even needed anymore. So they decided to create a worker slave that they can manipulate and they can use, and that's unfortunately us.
The Aiji aren't talked about enough. We heard about the Anunnaki, those from heavens come to earth. When I first got into the scriptures, I was listening to Jordan Maxwell, right? And he had the sons of God. It was all about the Aiji. Who are the Aiji, and what did they represent? What did they do on this planet?
The Aiji are the working class Anunnaki. Now, they weren't slaves. but they were kind of treated as slaves. Most of them were sent to Mars to work on Mars, and they were complaining about the atmosphere. They were complaining about conditions there. Mars was already kind of a scarred planet. It was and still even is now a livable planet. It used to be a moon. It was a moon of Tiamat before Tiamat exploded and turned into the asteroid belt. Now these Aiji, they are the ones spoken about in the Old Testament that basically fell to earth, is when they came to earth and then took women as their wives. They had no women, they had nothing. They were just working with no women, no vacations, no breaks, and the workload was getting heavier and heavier, and the conditions were getting worse and worse. And that's when they decided, we had enough. And so this was a class of people, more like a working class of people that I don't know if they volunteered to come along with the pantheon, or if they were forced to come, but at some point they got fed up with everything.
Were they the same race as the Anunnaki, or a different kind of demigod like Zeus compared to Hercules?
I believe that they were a different race. Yeah. And when you start looking into these tablets, you start to realize that these Anunnaki might have been a multiracial group of beings, not just all from this Nibiru place.
Multiple extraterrestrial races?
Right, multiple extraterrestrial races. There's even one passage that kind of alludes to one of the Anunnaki marrying somebody from another planet. So you start to look into this and you start going, wow, this may have been a multicultural race of people. Yeah. And when you look at the Emerald Tablets, which I wrote about, where Thoth is sent here by his dad, or sent to the land of Chem by his dad, to raise them back to a high level of civilization because the flood just happened. All of a sudden, he's talking about his crew spreading out all over the planet and actually duplicating what they did in the land of Chem. And then all of a sudden, you start to see these megalithic structures and these pyramids all over the world. So they became a global civilization again. But what's interesting is you have people all over the world in these areas that then possibly took on the genetic marker of their new ruler or king who started that civilization, which hence could be the reason for having different races on this planet.
Right.
Races, in my opinion, after doing a lot of research on biology, have nothing to do with I'm dark because my people are from the sunny area, and that's all. The real genetics talks about almost 2% variance between a Caucasian, a black man, a Native American, an Indian, a Chinese person. There's a variance there. It doesn't mean that we're not all one, because we're still a race, a human race. But what it does mean is on a genetic level, just through pure evolution, virtually impossible in the short amount of time we've been here for us to have that variance. That variance was a purposeful one. It was done in a laboratory. Yeah. And it could be a mark of, okay, these are my people, these are my people, these are my people. This is the regions that they're in. And they raise up these megalithic structures all over these geological node points, or these magnetic points around the planet.
So the Aiji, were the Anunnaki all negative, all positive, and were the Aiji either of that either?
It was they're just like us, so we're just like them. They were good people and bad people, good Aiji, good Anunnaki, bad, and so forth. Some really loved us, some actually risked losing their ability to even go back to their home world by marrying human beings, taking them as wives, and decided even some to stay here just because of that, because they fell in love with humans. And some tried to help, like Thoth the Atlantean. He literally wanted to help us raise our consciousness to a higher level. And why I respect him is because he never masqueraded as a god. He always said that he was a son of Atlantis, or a child of the sun. And he never said, I'm your god and you do what I do, and so forth and so on. He was deified long after he left a certain area. He left an area, he became then deified, and that's how he became called a god, but he never masqueraded as a god.
Right. If you track human history from the fallen angels, the Aiji, there have also been scriptures out there that talk about the Anunnaki staying in the heavens, where the Aiji were the slave drivers, or what do you want to ever call them. They were doing the work down here. So were the Aiji, did the Anunnaki leave and go home, and were the Aiji left here? And is the Aiji the bloodline that became the elite in the Cabal in the world?
I believe so. After the last Pyramid War, where Amun-Ra was the one who instigated it again, he escaped. But what happened was there was a nuclear war, most likely, and a lot of evidence of this nuclear war has been left all around the planet, where you have vitrified buildings, sand being vitrified in the Middle East. You have Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. Buildings are vitrified, dead bodies still laying in the street with high levels of radiation in them until this very day, not even touched by scavenging animals. So I believe that at that time, there was a war, and a lot of them left, but some of these working class Aiji people stayed here. They already had wives and families and bloodlines and everything else, probably even leading to the Merovingian bloodline, which would have led to Yeshua, who some people call Jesus. So I believe that the bloodline stayed, and when you really track these bloodlines and track it all the way back from the Sumerian King's List at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England, you discover that some of these Anunnaki people were ruling the earth for 28, 14, 15, 20,000 years. It ended up being over 140,000 years, but then you track that bloodline, it leads after the Great Flood into a half human, half Anunnaki bloodline that they had, which was like the kingship or the pharaonic bloodline. And then you track that after Alexander the Great conquers Egypt, far in the future from that point. These pharaohs and their bloodlines start basically migrating towards Europe. And across that time, they're mating with Arabs, they're mating with people from the Caucasus Mountains and so forth. They end up in England, they start another kingdom there. They become mostly Caucasian by this time, but their lineage goes all the way back to that Sumerian King's List. From there, you can track it all the way into the future, into the present, current day where we're at now, with the presidents of the United States all being directly related to that same exact bloodline, all cousins, genetically proven on the genealogies, many genealogy sites, and also even admitted by most of the presidents, current presidents themselves, including Obama's already admitted, Bush, Trump, Clinton.
Yeah.
It's even Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are actual cousins. They're like eighth cousins. And so forth. Bill Clinton is a cousin of Hillary Clinton. Obama and Bush are cousins. So it just goes way back, and it just shows you that no matter who wins the presidency of the United States, they always win because they have dogs on both sides, basically. And so no matter which one wins, they always win. They meaning the people that really run this planet.
And it makes you wonder. From birth, these people have to be conditioned to become our leaders. From before birth, from like thousands of years. The plan has to have been over thousands of years, but we live for such a short period of time that we forget, right? And the new generation doesn't care about the problems of the old generation because we have too much now. It's been a really well-constructed system to keep us enslaved, if you want to call it that, right? Were the Aiji, so if before the Great Flood, was the bloodline pure, and after the Great Flood, you said it became half human, half Anunnaki, so it changed right after that, but it was pure before?
Yeah, before the flood, it was pure bloodline, kingship. After the Great Flood, a decision was made to hand over kingship to humans, but not just humans in direct. You'd have to have a contact or a person in the middle, and that middle person would be half human and half Anunnaki or half Atlantean, whatever you want to call it. So that's how they maintain that bloodline, a little bit of control there. And these people that are ruling this planet, if you ask them, they truly believe that they were designed and born and bred to rule over everybody, to own us and rule over us and tell us what to do and control us. Rothschild, Rockefeller, all these people are, in their mind, that's their reality. That's what they feel.
Yeah. Even the Aiji, who were the working class that were treated almost like slaves by their overlords, came here, and instead of being like, no, I don't like this, they started doing the exact same thing. And even if some of them were good people that were just on this planet getting mating with daughters of men, over time it seems they created this systematic control of power, and power obviously creates more power, and once you have some, after thousands of years, it makes sense that they would be at the level of complete delusion of power that they are right now. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, what happens is you get a God complex, and when you start ruling and controlling people in a way and telling people that you're a god, over time you truly start to believe it.
Yeah.
This happens in current day times right now with people that live here, that are running countries. You start to get a God complex, and they actually got a God complex. They had so much superior technology over us. They had a much better understanding of the ether of space-time itself, how to manipulate frequencies and how to manipulate matter. So they were so far in advance. And plus, this was like a wild, wild west for them. They had no real laws here keeping them in check. So when they at first, they would combat each other as to, is this ethical to do or just not ethical to do? And then later on, you start to see it was just like, whatever goes, it's like, just do whatever.
Right.
And it was
they got used to the fact that there was no oversight.
Exactly, no oversight. When they got used to it, they just went crazy. I mean, they literally just went completely off the ranch.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for us, it put us in the jackpot, and there was nothing we can do because we didn't have the understanding or the technology to combat them. We had the numbers. So what they did was, since we used to live for a very long time before they even got here, we at the Tower of Babel incident, we were actually building a tower. Now, whether that was a cargo cult and we were mimicking something we saw them build, or we literally had become technologically advanced enough to build something, it literally threatened their power. And Enlil, who's known as Yahweh in the Bible, but the Bible just stole that story from the ancient Sumerian tablets. He's Enlil, the brother of Enki. He sees this tower, he gets extremely disgusted, and he knocks this tower down. Not only does he knock the tower down, this is when I knew as a kid when I read this that wasn't talking about the God of the universe, because it didn't make sense that people were working together and then this God who created a universe would come back and destroy something that people worked together to build. Then he says something very interesting. He says, "My seed shall not abide in man forever, his years shall be 120. Well, scientists at Harvard just discovered under the most pristine conditions a human being should live to 120 years. Well, why is this? The telomere caps on chromosome number 2, which they have now peer-reviewed science tells us that this cap was put there on this chromosome, and it forces us to live that long. And only what happens is the genetic material inside these telomeres starts to disappear over time as your cells and DNA replicate. It's like a buffer material. They discovered a way to stop this buffer material from disappearing from these telomeres, and they've extended the life of mice 2 to 3 times.
Wow.
Which means they can do it in humans now, which is now crucial for us, because if we don't take back control of this planet, they're going to start selling us time.
Selling us time. What does that mean?
Well, do you want to live to 150?
I live to 500.
It's going to cost you.
Wow.
It's going to cost you a million credits. You want to live to 150? It's going to
Makes sense.
Yeah.
They got the technology, and this is a good way to put it out through capitalism. One
Exactly.
product line at a time, right?
Exactly.
Maybe in 100 years they'll come out with a 300-year capsule.
There you go.
Right. So this brings us up to the question that you don't need a higher level of consciousness to have supreme advanced technology, because these individuals didn't seem that they had compassion, service to others, right? Some of them maybe did, but for the most part, obviously we're a product of what had happened with them. But they had high advanced technology. What is the difference between conscious technology and what we're creating compared to what they did?
Well, what I think is that in order to get to a level that they had achieved, you have to become extremely conscious. So all civilizations, according to the yugas, have a rise and a fall. So at some point, their civilization had risen into a golden age. They got to a golden age, and then some of them broke away and had a breakaway civilization where they were strip mining probably asteroids and planets for resources for whatever reason they was doing it for. But we ourselves are looking to strip mine meteors right now, and we'd love to strip mine other planets as well, including our own moon for helium-3. So if we would do it, why wouldn't they do it? We're not even close to them. So they had the breakaway. Now, during the breakaway civilization stage, again, they have no oversight. So all these other thoughts start to come in, and you start to get this God type of a conscious. So you think you're a God for real, and you're ruling over people, and you're making decisions with no oversight, and you're breaking every fundamental law that your civilization has already put in place, and there's nobody to stop you. So now here comes the decline of that consciousness, but the technology already exists. So that's why you see them getting to this state.
That's very interesting, because we've been going through the cycles of time here for quite some time. 26,000 year cycles could have lasted millions of years. We're only finding Atlantis now, which was probably one of the last great civilizations, yet it's still being considered myth, and some people are trying to debunk it. So just imagine about all the civilizations that existed on this planet that completely wiped out. So it's interesting that we were in a situation where we wiped ourselves out, so we lost a lot of this technology. So other civilizations could have left, maintained what they had so they didn't destroy themselves, and then just use the technology for thousands of years.
Exactly.
Right.
That's exactly what I feel happened. And that's how, because at first I was like, man, these Anunnaki are such warring, aggressive people. How can they even get to this level? But then I realized cycles of civilizations. And I believe that that's a universal type of a law where civilizations rise and fall all over. And when I read the Emerald Tablets, Thoth talks about going to other planets and watching civilizations rise and fall. And I said, that's it. That's the answer.
Yeah. So how does this connect to monotheism? Because in Sumerian scripture, in Hindu Mahabharata, even though I consider them still monotheistic because truly they go back to one source, one God, in even the Hindu scriptures, the Yahweh was part of this, came from the Sumerian scriptures, right? However, they chose one God and decided that there was only one God. How did that even happen in the first place?
Well, you see, they had the Elohim, which is plural for gods.
Yeah.
And these Elohim, or these Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them, they all were not even close to being the creator of the universe. But they themselves had somebody they called the creator of all.
Yeah.
So they believed in a one God at some point. But they masqueraded as gods, and Amun-Ra, who took over kingship of ancient Kim or Egypt in the age of Pisces, which is why a lot of Christians have that fish on the back of their car. They don't realize that it's really from the Amun-Ra kingship. But he ordered that there only be one God and to be him. He got tired of going back and forth and sharing the honor, or you want to call it, with his cousins and his nephews and everybody else who were already ruling different areas around the planet. And he's the one who decreed that at the end of every prayer, you give thanks to me, Amun-Ra. So that's where the amen comes from. When you say amen, you're giving thanks to one of the most brutal rulers of all time.
Wow.
He took over power via war early, because the age of Pisces hadn't even arrived yet. So he kind of bullied his way in. They finally let him have it. And then this guy just told evil. So he actually told Akhenaten, he's the sun disk for Akhenaten, that I want to usher in this monotheistic type of society, to go around and deface all the gods except me. So this is where Akhenaten began to become infamous by going around defacing all of the other gods, erasing hieroglyphs, like literally chipping them out and erasing their actual history, which pissed everybody off, which is why they wanted to get rid of this guy. But it was to usher in monotheism. A lot of people believe that, unfortunately, a lot of African American people believe that these faces and these noses were all chipped off because Europeans didn't want everybody to know that some of these people were black, but that's not the case. When you really dig into the history, you discover that Amun-Ra is the one who ordered these faces to be chipped and defaced and noses broken and everything else. In other words, to take away their power that they had over people by the way they physically looked in these glyphs. That, in other words, if the god can be wiped away on a slab of granite, you only have to look to the one that's left, and that was the sun disk, or the sun god Amun-Ra.
Wow. Was Akhenaten and Amun-Ra having physical communication with each other, or was it some astral interdimensional?
I think they were having physical communication. I think there were a lot of Anunnaki communicating directly with pharaohs and people on this planet through the stellas. The stellas were known to give off sound and voices, I believe because they're made of crystal granite. Crystal is a receiver of radio frequencies. And it'd be very easy for me to transmit a frequency into a crystal receiver and have a voice come out of it. So it wasn't magic and it wasn't mystical. It was real technology being used to communicate back and forth with pharaohs and kings.
What's your take on mainstream archaeology and what they're attempting to convey? I just listened to George Knapp show the other day, and George was saying he decided to have a mainstream archaeologist on there in order for him to convey what they believe, because he wanted both sides. Everything that I heard was kind of nonsensical. It was choosing one. This case on this giant does not exist because I've proven this wrong. Therefore, ad hominem. None of them exist, right? So what's your take on them? What would you say to those archaeologists?
The mainstream archaeologists are, unfortunately, they're puppets. They're trying to do one thing, and that's maintain their way of living, maintain their income, maintain their grants, their nonprofit status, and so forth. So what they've got to do is they've got to go with the overlords, whatever the overlords tell them they're allowed to say. If they go against that, they can risk losing their house, their car payments, and everything else. They won't get any money. They won't have any money for their projects. They won't be able to travel and do their stuff. So unfortunately, they've kind of sold themselves out in a way because they haven't found a way to generate their own revenue so that they can do real research. Everything that they're talking about is really nonsensical. They make up theories that become almost like doctrine, and it spreads through the whole society, and people take it as fact when it's actually fiction. And then they cover up a lot of stuff for the powers that be. They sweep stuff under the rug. They hide information. They destroy evidence. So they're really doing this planet and the human beings on this planet a disservice. I liken them to, people that are underlings that are just working for some overlords. Personally, I hate to to put them down like that, but that's what they're doing. When you do that kind of stuff, you're undermining the human race.
Today I'm going to talk about the Anunnaki bloodlines that are ruling the planet. This is something that I thought was an important topic because a lot of people have heard me talk about the Anunnaki and talk about the Atlanteans, which are really the same in one, and talk about these ancient aliens or these ancient astronauts that have come here and influenced mankind, genetically modified mankind. But it's always like, oh, it's in the ancient past, And the question comes up a lot, well, where are they now? Well, the truth is, I believe that they're still here. Not only as some of them here in their original form, but also some of their bloodlines still here till this very day. And that's what I hope to show you today, is the fact that the Anunnaki bloodline is still ruling and controlling this planet till this very current day. Zachariah Sitchin, in my personal opinion, is one of the greatest researchers of all time. One of, not the one, but one of. And at the end of his career, he was vilified and trashed, saying that he was, a Mason, and he was the only one that translated the tablets, and he made it all up and everything else. It's a big problem. Nobody wants to go dig in and do their own research. They just, oh, this guy said it, it must be real. They don't even know that guy, and they haven't researched anything about what he said. But the fact is, Zachariah Sitchin did not translate the Sumerian tablets. Let me say that again. Zachariah Sitchin did not translate the Sumerian tablets. What he did was he took pre-translated content called the Enuma Elish and the Seven Tablets of Creation, which were translated in the 1800s, by Leonard William King and also by George Smith. Those are the two guys that translated the Sumerian tablets. The Enuma Elish, the Seven Tablets of Creation, also the Epic of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That was all translated long before, as you can see, he was born in 1920. So long before Zachariah Sitchin was even born, it was already translated. This is important information for you to know as you go down the path to learning about the Anunnaki. You have to get a lot of the lies and misconceptions and propaganda out of your head. Okay, what Zachariah Sitchin did was he took the information from the Sumerian tablets, he took information from the Mahabharata, the Quran, and the Bible, and he tried to paint a picture as to what he thought happened in the ancient past. Did he get it 100% accurate? Probably not. I mean, who will? We weren't there. All we can do is come up with theories and ideas and concepts based off of our research. But what I've done now, since I've gotten involved with this and looked at the tablets myself and talked to other now authors that have also gone and written their own independent books based off their own research, we've all come to the same conclusion. These Anunnaki beings, or these Atlantean beings, they all came here in the ancient past. They all interacted with mankind in a way that had something to do with a genetic modification. Where their exact star system or planet that they came from is up in the air or in question. It could be this Nibiru planet, which orbits a brown dwarf star. It could be Sirius. It could be the Pleiades. It could be Orion. I tend to think that it's all of them. I think that there are multi-planetary species from all different planets, solar systems, and probably a galactic planetary type of a race. That's my personal opinion. And people say, well, where's Atlantis? Is it in the Atlantic Ocean? We're standing on Atlantis right now. Atlantis is the entire planet Earth. They came here, they staked the claim to it. There was a ring city in the Atlantic Ocean which sunk, or somewhere in the region. However, that was just one capital city of dozens that were already on the planet, and Atlantis is everywhere. No matter where you stand on this planet, you're standing on top of Atlantis. It was global. This is the CDLI Cuneiform Library website, which is hosted by UCLA. So if you ever say, man, I want to look at these tablets for myself, I encourage you to. You just go to the UCLA CDLI Cuneiform Library. You can take a virtual tablet off the shelf and drop it into the translator for free and find out what the tablet says. So that's how easy it is. You don't need Zachariah Sitchin, you don't need me, you don't need anybody else. All you need is some time and a computer. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The Anunnaki elite make their way to Earth, the fifth tablet. So we're talking about now, a very long time ago, about 450,000 years ago, these people came here, or these beings came here, and we look like them. They're not little green men with antenna. From the planet Lamu, the chariot departed toward Earth, the journey continued. Around the moon, they made circuits, a way station thereon to explore. Around the Earth, they made circuits toward a splashdown slowing. In the waters beside Eridu, Nungal, the chariot bring down. To Quay, by Enlil, constructed. They stepped off. Boats were no longer needed, so there must have been some type of a bridge that they stepped onto to walk to land. Enlil and Enki, their sister, would embrace, greeted. With Nungal, the pilot locked arms. The heroes, male and female, by present heroes, were the shouts greeted. All that the chariot brought was quickly unloaded. Rocket ships and skyships, and the tools by Enki designed, and provisions of all kinds. So they're setting up shop. They're making a base a way station, a base here on Earth. This is one of the first arrivals of these people here. They were called the heroes of old. They're known as the original pantheon, an original pantheon. The pantheon is not originally from Greece. It actually originated in Mesopotamia and Iraq. Enlil's construction plans 450,000 years ago. This is before they began to interact with humans, by the way. Even though we had an existing hominid on this planet, they were making a base for themselves and working themselves. On the way, Enlil to her, the landscape showed. The Edens, he's talking about his sister, talking to his sister. The Eden's extent to her he showed. So the Eden was already locked and planned out where they were going to put this Eden. From the skies, Enlil to her, his plans explained. An everlasting plan I have designed. To her he was saying, that which for all time construction shall determine, I have laid out. And if you look at that, if we stop right there, if you look at the ancient Sumerians and how they laid the first street grids, that's the same exact style grid we still use to this very current day. Okay, so it was laid out that way from ancient times. Away from Eridu, where dry land begins, my quarters shall be. Larsa will be its name, a place for directing it shall become. On the banks of the Baranu, the river of deep waters will it be located. A twin city thereof shall in future arise. Lagash I shall name it. Between the two on the plans a line have I drawn. 60 leagues thereafter a healing city shall come into being. A city of your own it shall be, talking to his sister. Shurabak, the haven city, I shall name it. On the center line it shall be located. To the fourth city it shall be leading. Nibiru Key, earth's crossing place, I will name it. A bond heaven earth, in it shall I establish. A bond heaven earth is very interesting. They have something called a Duran key, these Anunnaki beings, and this Duran key is this thing that they put in place that connects to another realm or another dimension or maybe another planet. Only the elite of the elites were allowed to walk through it. There's some cylinder scrolls depicting Enki walking through this thing. He's got these squiggles all around him like he's walking through a Stargate. It literally is a Stargate. It's a Duran key, a bond heaven to earth that they literally walk through to walk from earth back to their homeland is what they call it, or their home planet. On a crystal tablet, Enlil to Ninmah, the master plan he was showing. So he had some type of an iPad almost. On the tablet he saw more markings. Of them Enlil, she inquired, beyond the 5 cities a chariot place I shall henceforth build, with Nibiru to earth directly to arrive. So from Nibiru to earth directly to arrive. That's a Stargate. They're walking from earth directly back to their home planet. So these are some very, very advanced beings. And the fact that they were able to come here 450,000 years ago, and you look at some of the technology that they talk about, I estimate that they probably were about 1 million years ahead of us. That's about the true lifespan in terms of where we are now to where they are technology-wise. I believe they're about 1 million years ahead of us. So when you're dealing with somebody that's that far ahead, right now if somebody showed up to this planet that far ahead of us, a lot of people, maybe not us in this room, but a lot of people on this planet will think it was God. Right away, immediately. If I come here and I've got technology integrated into my body, I've got the ability to fly, I've got bionic eyes, I've got the internet connected directly to my ear. A Harvard University student developed this little thing that connects to the back of your ear, and it just sits on the bone, and it's connected wirelessly to Google. And he thinks the question, this is on 60 Minutes, he thinks the question, and then Google takes it, and then it sends him the answer back through the bone so he can hear it in his head. So he knows the answer to everything. Whatever you ask him, he has the answer to. There's nothing he doesn't know. As long as it's on Google, it's in his head. Now imagine a being comes here with that kind of technology and they have all that information stored in their head through some type of a chip that can store that amount of data. So the technology that they had made them appear to be gods even though they weren't. And mankind, unfortunately, we fell prey to their advanced abilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down a little path and we're going to start in the past and we're going to take a journey to the current day. So we're going to start off with the Sumerian King List, which is located in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England. You can go there right now today. It's actually one of the main displays and one of the main sought-after artifacts in that museum. I recommend anybody who has a chance to go there to look at it with your own eyes because you're looking at a piece of history that's on full display to the world that tells you that these beings ruled over this planet at a time where mankind wasn't ruling, but they were ruling over themselves for hundreds of thousands of years. So the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England, this is one of my Anunnaki admins for my group on Facebook. We have a group called Anunnaki History on Facebook, and we also have a Facebook page called Anunnaki History and an Instagram account as well. But he went to the Ashmolean Museum and took this video for me as he walked around. But that tablet literally lays out the King's List before the flood. So this is very important to know. This is pre-flood. Pre-flood, these beings ruled over the planet and ruled over themselves without interacting with mankind at that moment. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more. We're also going to talk about the Atrahasis epic. The Epic of Atrahasis is a Sumerian stone that has etched in it cuneiform text that talks about the Great Flood. Before the Great Flood, everywhere you look in these Sumerian tablets, you find that there was really a Great Flood. But the Great Flood is like the marking point to say, okay, before this flood, it was just these Anunnaki beings ruling, controlling, running themselves, actually even making their own working class people do a lot of the labor and work. And then much later, after the flood, is when they kind of said, okay, now we're going to put it on mankind. So that's where we're going to go with it. But when you want to know the truth about where the Bible got all their information for the Old Testament, it came from the Atrahasis epic, literally copied, almost word for word. It came from the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation. It came from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and also some of it came from the Mahabharata. Also the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is really called the Book of Going Forth by Day. That's the true name of the book. It's not really called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So that's where all the content came from for a majority of the Old Testament and a lot of the Proverbs. New Testament, a lot of it came from the Emerald Tablets. The people that wrote the Bible 100 AD to 900 AD, long after the people in the Bible that they're talking about were long gone and dead. Nobody who's talked about in the Bible wrote any of it. Not one of them. As a matter of fact, they were unlearned men. They had no knowledge of anything. A lot of them even couldn't write or read. The Bible was written long after people were dead, and most of it was just copied text. It's not an insult to anybody who believes in the Bible. What I'm just saying is you've got to dig deeper into what you're reading and understanding, and you've got to go into the root base of the original language and find out that there's almost 10,000 mistranslations, and then find out the source material for where they got that content. It wasn't the Torah copied as well. And when you dig deeper and deeper, you start to discover that a lot of this information came directly from the Sumerian tablets, especially the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we're going to talk about. The 7 Tablets of Creation, the British Museum right now is where they're located, as well as the Atrahasis epic. They talk about the creation of the solar system, the creation of Earth, and they also talk about these Anunnaki beings coming to this planet, as well as mining this planet for resources and also Mars for resources. And then it talks about them genetically modifying the existing hominid on the planet, creating a worker slave. They didn't say that they created anything from scratch, but they genetically modified what would have been our cousins, okay? That's important to know. They didn't make anything from scratch. The Enuma Elish, also spelled Enuma Elish, is the Babylonian creation myth. It was recovered by Austin Henry Layard in 1849 in the ruined library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, which is now Mosul, Iraq, and published by George Smith in 1876. So again, not Zachariah Sitchin, George Smith, 1876. The Enuma Elish has about 1,000 lines and is recorded in Old Babylonian on 7 clay tablets, each holding between 115 and 170 lines of Sumo-Akkadian cuneiform script. Most of the tablet 5 had never been recovered until recently, and tablet 5 was recently discovered and is currently in the Sulamaya Museum in Iraq. This is tablet number 5, which just came out a couple years ago. They finally put it on display. So it's a full story now. An epic that predates a lot of the material that we consider to be modern religious content and books, all come from these ancient tablets which are etched into stone and can't be changed. Also, there's another document out there called the Terra Papers. These are some ancient records that indigenous Native Americans have their hands on for a very, very long time. Robert Morning Sky is one of the famous Native American elders that still talks about it to this day. It's an incredible epic which talks about the creation of the universe. It has the same people, Anu, Enlil, Enki. I mean, the same people that are talked about in Sumerian tablets are now talked about in this epic. So these people, these beings are talked about. Now, these beings' names also show up in other places. Don't think they're just showing up in these ancient tablets. It was also copied into the Bible. You can find Marduk and Enlil and all their names in the Bible. You can find it in the Quran. You can find it in the Torah. You can find it in the Jewish American Library as well. You can go right to JewishAmericanLibrary.org and you can pull all these people up. They're in there, but nobody ever reads them or realizes they're reading about people that were talked about in these ancient Sumerian tablets and in the Terra Papers. We also have written evidence of the Anunnaki engaging mankind after a global flood 36,000 years ago. This is how far back this flood goes. The flood didn't just happen 5,000 years ago, 4,000, 3,000. No, this flood is very, very old. But this is from the Emerald Tablets. This is why I had to write this book. When I went into the book, the very first few verses were talking about floodwaters residing over the planet and mountaintops starting to come back up. And I go, whoa, well, right away I'm going, wait a minute. I'm looking at an ancient record of a flood here in this 36,000-year-old text. And this is what, when he, at the time that he wrote it, this is around the time that the flood actually occurred. Over the world then broke the great waters, drowning and sinking, changing Earth's balance, until only the temple of light was left, standing on the great mountain of Undal, still rising out of the water. Some who were living saved from the rush of the fountain. So some people survived, just like it said in the Bible and everywhere else you meet it, the Epic of Gilgamesh and everything else. Called me then the master, saying, gather ye together my people, take them by the arts ye have learned far across the waters. So he's telling him, his master is his boss or his supervisor. It's actually Enki who's talking to him, he's thought me. He's telling Thoth to take his crew, get his crew together, everything that I taught you how to save this or help these people, take all that knowledge and wisdom with you to this place across the waters and help bring them back to a higher level. You'll see that. Until ye reach the land of the hairy barbarians, dwelling in the caves of the desert, follow there the plan that ye know of. So Thoth said, okay, I'll do it. He gathered I then my people and entered the great ship of the master. So they went into a ship. Upward we rose into the morning. Now I haven't been on a ship that rose up yet. Dark beneath us lay the temple. So they're obviously ascending to a high level where the temple is becoming like a dark, faint object. Suddenly over it rose the waters, vanished from the earth until a time appointed. So they actually left the atmosphere. They're gone. They're up in the atmosphere. Fast we fled toward the sun of the morning until beneath us lay the land of the children of Chem. Beneath us. So they're in a ship that doesn't sail out into an ocean. They're on a ship that flies and then it descends. The land of Chem is ancient Egypt. That is the original name of Egypt before the modern name Egypt, which is a fairly new name. And that's where you get the term, because of Thoth teaching people there, the words chemistry and alchemy come out of the land of Chem. That's where it all re-originated after the Great Flood and retaught. Raging they came with cudgels and spears, lifted in anger, seeking to slay the sons of Atlantis. So when he landed his ship, these barbarian people at the land of Chem, trying to defend their territory, came to attack. Then I raised my staff and directed a ray of vibration, striking them still in their tracks as fragments of stone in the mountain. So he had some type of a stun gun in ancient times. So when I got to this point, I said, okay, I got to find out everything about this guy in this book. I need to know everything about this whole thing. I literally just dug into it. We have something called active denial system in the military today, right now. And the active denial system, if you come to attack a group of people or their location or a target or even riot, they have a system where they point this ray at you that's invisible, and it literally jingles the atoms in your body and makes you feel like you're on fire and turns you away. Then he says, long dwelt we in the land of Chem, long and yet long again. So we're talking thousands of years, until obeying the commands of the master, so until he fulfilled his mission, who while sleeping yet lives eternally. They have these halls of Amenti where they have these chambers where they put avatar bodies in. So while they put an avatar body in a regeneration chamber, they walk amongst men in another avatar body. This is why they have so many different names. And then they would transfer their consciousness from one body to another. And they always say, we walk amongst men like a man, but unlike a man. And this is what they're talking about. That from the womb of time, wisdom might rise again in her children. So it's amazing technology that they had, information and knowledge and wisdom they had back then that they used to interact with mankind. Now, the reason why I like Thoth a lot was because, unlike his relatives, he didn't masquerade as a god. He was only deified by the pyramid priests after he left Egypt and never came back for many thousands of years. They said this guy was God. The story just kept going on and on. Next thing you know, he was a god. But when these barbarians in the book, when these barbarians groveled at his feet, he said, no, stand up. I'm just a son of Atlantis. I'm just here to teach you and help you. And he had an opportunity right then and there to say, yeah, I'm your God, pray to me, bow to me, and everything else. But he didn't do that. He didn't masquerade as a god like his relatives did. So let's talk a little bit about Egypt now as we go into this bloodline. The last native pharaoh of Egypt was Nekhtambio II, who was pharaoh before the Achaemenids conquered Egypt for the second time. The Achaemenid rule over Egypt came to an end through the conquest of Alexander the Great in 332 BC, after which it was ruled by the Hellenic pharaohs of the Ptolemaic dynasty. A lot of people are under the illusion that Egypt was only, the whole time, was just one race or another. Egypt has ruled over by many different races of people over thousands of years. Toward the end of Egypt's reign, it was more of a Caucasian race. Alexander the Great's victory over Egypt that was no longer a dominating kingdom after being conquered earlier by the Persians. So when Alexander the Great entered Egypt, people saw him as a liberator who had freed the Egyptians from many years of brutal oppression at the hands of the Persian Empire. The Persians had taken over Egypt. They had basically defeated Egypt in ancient times. And then Alexander the Great came and really was a liberator. He was actually looked at like, wow, thank you for beating these people up and taking them out of here because they were killing us. He was really looked on and thought of as a great person in Egypt when he came and took over. He relieved them from a lot of the oppression. Alexander the Great, who was only 24-year-old at the time, was crowned pharaoh in Memphis. He visited the temple of the oracle of Amun, and the great Macedonian conqueror was declared the son of God, Amun, which actually there's a lot of records that show that supposedly Alexander the Great was half Anunnaki, who Amun, or Amen-Ra, was his dad, and his brother was a human being. This is a very special title because Amun was worshipped as the Egyptian creator god. He was considered the king of the gods and the physical father of all pharaohs. There's a lot of information out there that you can look online. It talks about Alexander the Great as he went on this conquest in his early 20s to conquer most of the area, most of these countries, with UFOs flying ahead of him and helping him in battle. And he was told that his father was a god, and when he got to Egypt, he discovered that Amen-Ra was supposedly his real father. Who still runs the planet till this very day? Who owns all the media? Rothschild and Rockefeller. They own everything. They've literally got their hands in it. Who owns the central bank? Rothschild and Rockefeller. Listen, it's all the seeds, everything. They own everything. They control. They have $700 trillion of wealth. They control this entire planet. But that's when it started in terms of being handed down to them directly from Amen-Ra. Was at the end of that last pyramid war, when a lot of the pharaohs were fleeing out of Egypt and taking themselves, as I'll show you next, into Europe. He handed down everything and control over to the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And till this day, that's who owns it. So Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great, Rome, Nubia, Babylon, Sudan, Kush, and Persia. Like I said before, Egypt had many different races of rulers. So as the Egyptians the pharaohs began to migrate out of Egypt, realizing their time had come to a complete end, these pharaonic families, I should say. But they migrated to England, and they went probably around the long way, I'm sure. But as they went and traveled, migrating through, you can imagine how long it took back then to get from point A to point B, as we're looking here, through the land masses and through, small ships and so forth. It took a very long time. But through that process, they made it with other people in different lands, in Turkey and Bulgaria and Romania and Germany. And so they got to England, and they began to create kingdoms and monarchies. Okay, people say, why is England all about Egyptian motif and pyramids and all this kind of obelisk and everything else? It's because they have a deep root in Egyptian history. Let's look at the history of Anglo-Saxon England. Anglo-Saxon England was early medieval England, existing from the 5th to the 11th centuries, from the end of the Roman Britain until the Norman conquest in 1066. It consisted of various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms until 927, when it was united as the Kingdom of England by King Aslan. It became part of the short-lived North Sea Empire. And basically what they're saying is the Anglo-Saxons were members of the Germanic-speaking groups. As you know, they migrated through Germany to get there, who migrated to the southern half of the island of Great Britain from nearby northwestern Europe, and their cultural descendants' Anglo-Saxon history thus begins during the period of the sub-Roman Britain, following the end of the Roman control, and traces of the establishment of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in the 5th and 6th centuries. But what they're saying here is that these pharaonic family lines migrated up into Europe, and then they started this Anglo-Saxon dynasty, basically, is what they're trying to say. And from this, we're now moving forward into the future, into the ruling elite that are controlling this planet till this very day. We're getting a lot closer to it. Half of European men share King Tut's DNA. Because why? Because that's where they went. We went to Europe. Well, they went to Europe, and along the way, mating with various different races, by the time they got there, a lot of them ended up being a different color of person. But the DNA doesn't lie. The DNA can be traced back to King Tut, basically to the Egyptians is really what it's saying. So these Anglo-Saxon people are really the offspring of, or the bloodline of, these pharaonic people, these pharaonic bloodlines. Timeline of kings and queens of England. The Plantagenets, which is a very important name because this is where it really begins to take hold on us here in America. The Plantagenets were a huge, powerful family, not just in England, but throughout Europe. The first Plantagenet was King Henry II, whose father owned vast lands in Aiji, an area as big as Normandy around the modern town of Tours. But if you look down a little bit, you see this dynasty is normally subdivided into three parts. The first Plantagenet kings were Avengians, and the next were the Plantagenets. This is very important information because the Plantagenet bloodline is the bloodline that all the presidents of the United States are related to. So you have at the very bottom, 1399 to 1485, the House of Lancaster of York, normally separated from mainstream Plantagenets because they are considered the first truly English rather than French kings. So when French kings started taking over in England, it was kind of the end of the Plantagenet thing, but the bloodline of the Plantagenets continued to move on, and which is directly related to the Sumerian kings. John Lackland was the king of England from 1199 until his death in 1216. John lost the Duchy of Normandy and most of the other French lands to the King Philip of France, King Philip II of France, resulting in the collapse of the Avenging Empire and contributing to the subsequent growth and power of the French. So basically, one of his big failures was the fact that as he ruled, unfortunately, it was when they lost to the French, and the French began to take over England and began to rule over them and become their monarchy, supposedly or basically. But the bloodline of these people still exists and still continue to run. So just to the point where we are right now, let's just take a look at this, a brief summary. We go back to the Sumerian kings. We go back to the Sumerian kings as before the flood. The Sumerian kings, who ruled for thousands and thousands of years, then had these pharaonic lines after the Great Flood that they kind of handed over the leadership to be the liaison between them and the human beings. These pharaonic bloodlines in the beginning were half human and half Atlantean or half Anunnaki, depending on how you want to call it. They would only give the initial power, this pharaonic power, to somebody who had their blood in them. So these pharaonic people are directly related to the Sumerian kings. Then you have them getting conquered and kind of moving out of the area over time and migrating, the bloodlines migrating across into Europe. Now they're a monarchy. So you see, we go from Sumerian King's List in ancient Iraq, all the way now, we've gone with this bloodline taken all the way into Europe. This is where we are right now. This is the Rothschild and Rockefeller, by the way, at the top. Now, one of them obviously passed away, but they still have family members that still take the place, of where they were and continue to do the same exact things. But it was these guys who arranged for Hitler to take power through the Illuminati. Secret societies in Germany, like the Thule Society and the Vril Society, which created their German networks. It was the Rothschilds who funded Hitler through the Bank of England and other British and American sources like the Rothschild-Kuhn, Loeb Bank, which also funded the Russian Revolution. The very heart of Hitler's war machine was the chemical giant Aiji Farben, which had an American arm that was controlled by the Rothschilds through their lackeys and the warbugs. The warbugs and the lackeys are basically the people who started the Illuminati. These people even control the Illuminati. They control everything. Paul Warburg, who manipulated into existence the privately owned Central Bank of America, the Federal Reserve in 1913, was on the board of the American Aiji, indeed Hitler's Aiji Farben, which ran the slave labor camp at Auschwitz, was in reality a division of Standard Oil, officially owned by the Rockefellers. Put in truth, the Rockefeller Empire was funded into existence by the Rothschilds. So, they helped each other out, and they came up, and they, looking to take over the world, which they still did it anyway. Now, one thing that's very interesting is the fact that you see Hitler there. Hitler was actually a Rothschild. A lot of people don't even know this. Hitler was a Rothschild, and they helped him gain power. They're the ones who expedited him to power. That's how he got there. Then you have Operation Paperclip. Remember earlier it said that as these pharaonic lines had migrated up, they became the kingdoms of England. It was originally German in nature, Germanic. Well, that's why you have a lot of people like in Germany, like Hitler, who rose to power, and then you have Operation Paperclip, Project Paperclip, I'm sorry, which was really an operation done by the U.S. military to acquire a lot of their scientists that were operating under Hitler. And through Project Paperclip, there was a secret program of joint intelligence objectives that they basically took all of these scientists. It wasn't just a few. A lot of people didn't know that it was about 1,600 of them that they went to Germany and took and brought to the United States. And they put them in positions of power immediately. They put them in positions of power. You had people running NASA. You had people running NACA, who was before NASA. You had people running different aerospace companies. You had people running parts of the CIA that were Nazis, directly from Germany to here, working in the government. And not just a few, like I said, 1,600 of them. We became the Fourth Reich. George Bush's father, the late U.S. Senator Prescott Bush, was a director and shareholder of the companies that profited from their involvement with the financial backers of Nazi Germany. The Guardian has obtained confirmation from newly discovered files in the U.S. National Archives that a firm which Prescott Bush was the director was involved with the financial architects of Nazism. His business dealings, which continued until the company's assets were seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act, has led to more than 60 years later to civil action, damages being brought to in Germany. I mean, basically what they're saying is Prescott Bush, through this private bank that he started, and U.S. money, had helped fund Hitler and help him become powerful, along with the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, with their help. They were all working together. This is one big giant family. So when you realize that the Bushes are related directly to the Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds are directly related to the Pharaohs, and the Pharaohs are directly related to the Sumerian kings, who are Anunnakis. It's a very important thing that a lot of people don't know about. When George Washington was going to become the president of the United States, a very interesting thing happened. It was really an agreement made. We're going to allow you to take over this new land, and they actually offered him the option of being called a king or a president. He said, I'll be called a president, gives the people the illusion of separation. Who's still ruling America? Not us. 45 facts about the 45 presidents. Every single president in the United States of America was related to John Lacton, the King of England, the Plantagenet king, except for Van Buren. Van Buren is the only one that was not related. Van Buren was still related to British royalty, but at that particular election, they didn't have a suitable puppet to put in place, so they had to put somebody else who at least was British royalty. But Van Buren was the only one that wasn't related. Every single president, all the way till this very current day, including Obama, including Trump, are all related directly to the Sumerian kings. We're coming to the point now where we're starting to realize who's running and controlling this planet till this very day. The illusion of, or the lie about all people can be traced back to one person is an absolute fallacy. If you look into the ancient tablets, if you just go into, first of all, you go into the Bible. Let's go into the New Age religions, the Bible. You go into the Bible and you look at the story of Adam and Eve, and you have Adam and Eve, you have Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel. The next thing you know, God comes back, he's pissed off, he kicks him out. The first thing Cain says is, if I go out there, the people are going to kill me. What people? There was already millions of people on this planet long before Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. Long before Adam and Eve even showed up on the scene, there were already millions of people on this planet. People were here already, so God put a mark on his head so that the people would know, don't touch him because he's basically my dude, you know, in a way. That God was actually Enlil. If you look into the Sumerian tablets, it's Enlil. If you look into some of the other ancient scriptures, you discover it was Satan, the Lord of Eden. Okay? Who is it? It's this Enlil character who also calls himself Yahweh. There's also another name that he uses in modern-day Bible is Yahweh. It's Enlil is the one who's responsible for a lot of it. What he tried to do was blame his brother for a lot of his ill-doings and say that his brother was the serpent. But that was Enki. Enki was the one trying to help humans and felt bad for us, and Enlil was the one trying to literally just treat us like animals and destroy us. So, you know, he was a pretty evil dude. But people are not all related because people were created in various different methods. Some evolved, some people were genetically modified. In the Sumerian tablets, they talk about genetically modifying or taking clones of genetically modified beings, and they weren't able to replicate sexually, and they couldn't make enough of them fast enough, according to these tablets, so they started looking into how can we then do artificial insemination. They didn't say that exact phrase, but they describe it on this famous tablet where I think it's Ninhursag or Isis takes the egg from an existing hominid, cleans up the genetic material. They then insert the Anunnaki DNA and genetic material into it. She puts it in her womb and takes it to full term in 10 months and gives birth to something called the Adamu, which means first man. Yes. So this is basically the beginning stages of Homo sapiens sapien is what we're looking at here about 200,000 years ago. So we're talking about the fact that they're trying to say everybody's related to one person in Africa. It doesn't exist. It's fake. So what we have here, we have a bloodline that's been running this planet for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. They came here 450,000 years ago. About 200,000 years after that, they genetically modified the existing hominid on this planet. They then began to put things on us like different types of economic systems, debt, and everything else. They started that way back in the Sumerian tablets. You can look and see people's debts. A lot of the tablets that have been discovered show IOUs, people owing sheep for corn and all kind of crazy stuff. And it also shows the level of inflation that existed back then that the Anunnaki established all the way back thousands of years ago, and we can still see that inflation affecting us to this current day. We then see how the Rothschild and Rockefellers were also given power by Amen-Ra, who was considered to be the sun god. He's the same person that told Akhenaten, Pharaoh Akhenaten, to go and deface all the statues and start deleting a lot of the information from the hieroglyphs around Egypt. That's why a lot of the, if you've been to Egypt like I have been, you see a lot of the noses broken off, ears broken off, and a lot of chipped away gods. It's not what a lot of people say, oh, Napoleon went and he didn't want people to know that people were black in Egypt and all this kind of stuff. I'm sorry to tell you guys, that's not the case. It's just not the case. After my research, I believed it at first too, but after I did more research and actually went there in the person and spoke with homegrown archaeologists, investigated and researched the text myself, come to find out, Amun-Ra ordered Akhenaten to do this to the point where he started defacing so many glyphs that they decided they had to get rid of this guy. That's what happened with Akhenaten. They said, man, you got to go. Not only do you got to go, we're going to kill your son too. But they got rid of him, and he said he was taking orders directly from the sun disk, or the sun god, who was Amun-Ra at the time. But that's where it came from. It came from Akhenaten was defacing this stuff. But they put this system in place to keep us down, to keep us fighting each other. From this time when we had the Tower of Babel incident, where Yahweh came back, who was actually Enlil, and discovered that human beings were working together on one accord to build this structure. What creator of the universe do you know would come back, that's supposed to be all-knowing and all-loving, and see people working together, his creation, working together in unison with no problems, and then destroy it, and then take them, split them apart, change their language, and then shorten their lifespans? That's the biblical story. But also, guess where they got it from? The Sumerian tablets. And what's amazing about that is, like I said last night in my other lecture, they discovered that this was true in biology, genetically. So when Yahweh came back and said, I'm going to destroy this tower, and he said, my seed shall not abide a man forever, his years will be 120. Well, they just discovered that the maximum lifespan of a human being on average should be about 120 years. They discovered how to shorten that. They discovered how to stop the shortening of the telomeres in chromosome number 2 to allow us to live much longer than we can live. This is peer-reviewed real science. They did it to mice. Mice now live in 3 times the amount of the lifespan that they would have had unless they didn't stop the telomeres from shrinking. These telomere caps have buffer genetic material that literally give a little bit of a leeway for cells and DNA to replicate, because your body's consistently doing that at all times. And what happens is, when you're going through this process, you need that little buffer to you don't lose any information that goes into the next cell and the next DNA strand. But they discovered they can stop that from happening, and you can still replicate your cells and your DNA in a laboratory. Which means, like I said last night, if we don't take back control of this planet, eventually they're going to start to sell us time. That's the next level of control that they're going to look for. It's a reality, guys. It's not fake. It's a true reality. Hey, well, you want to live for 200 years? Well, you got to do this and that. You got to come up with this amount of money or that kind of money, or this kind of service or that kind of service. This is where we're getting to in the point of them ruling over us. And like I said before, I'm going to provide you with a solution. A lot of people go into rioting. They go into, they're thinking about, we're going to go picketing, and we're going to have a 10,000 man march or a 1 million man march, and we're going to walk on the streets of Washington, and we're going to do all this stuff. And what happens? We're going to vote for this president. We're going to vote for that president. What happens? It's been the same system since day number 1. Yeah, you get a little benefit from this president, a little benefit. Everybody has a little something they do, you know. You got to give people credit where credit is due, but the overall, you look at the overall picture, we're still being manipulated at a very high level. Even they themselves don't have complete control and domination over us. They're taking orders from people above them. That's what you got to keep in mind. They're taking orders from people above them. And that bloodline that now is running and controlling the majority of the world with the strongest and largest army, with the most control over space, with the satellite technology and everything else, is the United States government, which is under the rulership and kingship of these bloodlines that trace all the way back to the Sumerian King List. And how do we stop this? How do we fix this problem? The thing we got to remember is there's a lot more of us than there is of them. And it doesn't take fighting and going to war against them and all this other kind of violent stuff. We all have to come together in unison. We got to go back to the Tower of Babel. We got to say, look, we're all one. We're brothers or we're sisters. Forget about race, colors, languages, and barriers and all this other kind of crazy stuff. We have to come back together as one unit, one person, one force. And then we've got to be together spiritually and consciously. We have to understand that there's something bigger and greater than us. And you have to respect everyone's belief systems and everyone's ideals or how they live life and whatever they do, and just respect it, have unconditional love for everyone. And then the third thing we got to do is we just got to say no. You have to get the fear out of our hearts. That's the biggest thing. The biggest problem we have is fear. They rule us by fear, because once you go into fear mode, you go into a low frequency vibration in your DNA, and they know this. So then they get you into a fear mode. Everything is based off of fear. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. If you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. Now you're in fear and flight mode all the time. And now they go, now we're going to manipulate them with the TV programming, and we're going to put this into them, and we're going to keep them fear and low frequency, and now we can manipulate them and control them to do whatever we want them to do. When we drop the fear out of our hearts, because fear is an illusion, fear is an option, okay? And then once we drop the fear and we come together, and all in unison, we're able to achieve something that big and that monumentous, which can happen and will happen, because it's happened in the past. It will happen again in the future. That's when we will free ourselves from this Anunnaki bloodline that's ruling this planet.